or point to somebody who can answer better than I can.
Great. Well, let's then start with some more questions. Mr. Keeley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have an unqualified report, right?
Yes.
Before us with 3 material weaknesses, 1 significant deficiency. So from my perspective, obviously I don't want to see these weaknesses. I don't like to see these deficiencies, but I'm pleased to hear that it's an unqualified report. What is a reasonable time frame for us, I think you used the term in the not so distant future, for us to not have these weaknesses or deficiencies identified?
And I'll let you go first.
Mr. Smith has done a lot of talking, so let me jump in here. I think that's a great question. As it pertains to the first 2 material weakness comments that you see in the letter, I think we've already seen significant progress being made. Mr. Smith spoke to CARM not being a silver bullet, but I think once CARM is implemented, certainly that is going to assist in removing some of the concerns relative to those material weakness comments. Comment number 3 regarding the internal controls over member data, that's probably where we have the most significant concerns. You're talking about a lot of historical data that has accumulated over years. I think over the last several years, the controls over the member data have improved. As information is submitted through the Secure Employer website, there are edit checks. Those edit checks have changed and evolved over time. So they certainly caught some issues relative to the member data. But as Mr. Smith spoke to, we're talking about the accuracy of things in addition to pension spiking as it relates to demographics, credible earnings, years of service, and those sorts of things that impact multiple items on the financial statements. As part of Business Renew, I know there's projected in the future for there to be a new pension administration system. And again, I think a new tool will certainly help over member data. But what you have to consider is the integrity or the accuracy of that data going into even a new technological solution, if you will. And then the fourth comment I think Mr. Smith already spoke to in terms of seeing significant progress even after we have issued our report.
Follow-up question. It goes without saying that this is a very complex organization on many different levels, simply by its size, the magnitude. Working in a challenging environment with limited resources, antiquated systems, manual inputting of data, etc. How surprised should we be that there are material weaknesses, or would it be a surprise? Should we have expected not to see any? Would it have been a reasonable expectation, given the totality of the organization, for us not to have some weaknesses identified?
Our historical perspective only spans now 2 years. I think a similar question perhaps may have been asked of us last year, and I don't think we can speak to the results and the findings of the predecessor auditors previous to Crow. But now that we understand the organization, we've audited the organization for a couple of years, I think due to the items that you have just cited in your question, I don't think it's unusual to have findings such as those that we have found. But certainly the reason for the letter, as Mr. Smith spoke to, is to make sure that the committee and management understands the gravity and severity of those concerns, and that there's awareness and a sense of urgency to address those concerns as soon as possible.
Final question is for Mr. Yetman. What would you recommend to the committee as to what our expectations should be in terms of receiving reports or updates as to the progress that is being made by management in resolving these weaknesses that have been identified? What's a reasonable expectation?
In my opinion, it would be reasonable for you to look at the work plan and see an item on the work plan for these items to be brought forward to you fairly frequently. It's my expectation that management probably already has formed some sort of action plan to address these issues. And the Audits and Risk Management Committee is where that should land. And in fact, if you were to take a peek at the next meeting, it's an item on the, I believe, it's already an item on the next meeting, appropriately so. And it should probably be an item, I don't know if it should go every meeting, the 4 meetings a year. I don't know if it should show up every meeting, because there may not be much to report between any 2 meetings, depending how close they are together. But my recommendation would be that absolutely, these don't fall off the table, that there absolutely be, whatever the implementation plan is, that it be brought back to this committee, and that a report be given to this committee, whether it's on the table for discussion or simply just part of the report. Is your choice. You can always take something off if you choose to talk about it. But I believe you should have the expectation that it should show up as frequently as there are things to discuss. It might not be every quarter, twice a year at least.
Jack?
Yeah, I think maybe there's a better way of presenting some of that activity than the way we've been doing it, through narrowing the definition of it through Business Renew and providing you project updates and risk management assessment of Business Renew, and broadening that definition to some of the other issues that are in this, since it isn't just about a software installation. So maybe there's a better way to recenter that conversation around this issue, around internal controls, and rather than it seemingly the board monitoring a technology implementation. So let me think about that. And then the other points I would make, let's not lose track, feeling that there's periodic activity taking place on these issues. There's literally hundreds of people in the building, hundreds, working on these issues every day right now. So it is that through these projects. So it is no lack of attention going through it. We have a couple things. There's no piece of software you can just simply buy, and there's no consulting firm we can just hire to come in and do it, or a body of temporary workers that could come in the door and fix all the data. It requires subject matter experts in the building that can do that, who have real jobs too, doing other activities. So that means getting that balance of making sure that we still pay, the checks go out every month, and all the things we invest the money in investments every day. That still goes with also asking them to spend part of their time now on internal controls. So we're asking everyone to have multiple points of attention in the organization, but there was no easy way of procuring it. So that does mean it's the hard labor of the organization. And the last point I would make, we've made the decision here, and let's use the third bullet as the example on member data. Clearly, we don't want to repeat the reinvention of our corporate system like was done back in 2001, where the data translation or the data, the movement of the data into the new system was not done with enough care. So we have, in fact, inherited from 2002 all the problems that were in the pre-start system. They were just passed through the system, so much of that. So I want to make sure, that wasn't really said that clearly today, that is part of the early parts of Business Renew, is dealing with data cleansing and getting the data ready. But even though you all are expressing today rightfully a desire to get going and do this as fast as we can, we've made a decision here to think long-term about the system. We could stop dead in its tracks right now if you wanted to, that Business Renew project. Finish CARM, don't worry about a new pension administration system, and do everything and scurry around fixing START for a fair amount of money. That was one of the branches in the road we talked about. It certainly would create to you the appearance of fixing a lot of things, and that might feel good on a temporal basis to us all. But I think the staff here have a lot more integrity when they look at this, and they recognize that the right solution is long-term solutions that require a lot more elbow grease to get it done. So that is the path we're on, is that long-term development of a new system and making sure the data is done right this time, so that the people in this building 20 years from now aren't having this conversation about why did they just pass the data through to whatever we call the new system after START. So it is with that strategy that we're working, which is investing that real laborious effort now to get the data better positioned going forward. But you know, that I guess on the one hand, if you were in the building, you would certainly feel the stress of having hundreds of people work on this, but there needs to be actually some organizational patience as well that goes with that. I guess I'd have to argue, if we really like long-term solutions to things. Because, you know, most organizations take the easy way out and work on short-term impulses and try and get appearances of things done. But I think keeping with the perspective of what this business is, which is long-term, we're thinking about this, I think, much more strategically. So I guess I respect the friction points. You certainly deserve, as a board, good measurement and evidence that if we can agree that we're on the right plan together, the plan's being worked, right? We certainly wouldn't want to do that in an insular fashion. So that was my first thought, was let's think again about how to be a little more targeted to these issues in reporting to you rather than just the technology implementation. So does that help at all?
No, I think that helps a lot. I mean, I don't want to jump to what we're going to do yet, because we still haven't heard from committee members. Mr. Boykin wants to talk. I've got some questions, and then I think we can address what this committee expects to see to monitor the progress over the next year. And I really appreciate it, and I think the perspective you just gave, Jack, is probably reflective of this committee, which is we want long-term sustainable solutions. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. And we don't want shortcuts, and we don't want things to be done just for appearance sake. But on the other hand, we've got, you know, the material weaknesses that have been presented to us again, and we need to attend to them. So let me turn to Mr. Boykin, and you can any questions, comments you have.
Okay, thank you, and thank you all for your presentation. The one question I had, Pedro mentioned, this is sort of like deja vu, and to some extent I agree, but there was a sentence or two that jumped out at me with respect to the first material weakness. The bottom of page 3 of the report, ARM 83, mentioned discussions regarding internal controls suggested a lack of understanding by certain branches. Control framework is fluid, not a check-the-box exercise. It's a means to an end, not an end in itself. And I guess my question is, it's one thing for me if management concurs with the recommendations and spells out processes to mitigate, but is there, you know, a cultural issue that you're finding, and is that what the training is indeed intended to address? So I just
Can I
wondered.
answer that first, actually, if you don't mind, because I think that's why, in fact, the solution to this, even though I know when you say training, you think, oh gosh, what's training? That doesn't sound like it's going to accomplish anything. You're not doing a task. Just the opposite, I would argue. If it was solving this, would just be barking orders to the organization to develop that policy and develop it by March 31st. It has a temporal effect on the control environment, that activity. That's why, in fact, we've got a very good training department here. And if it wasn't this topic, any of the areas we take training seriously around our activity. So we don't think it's a soft activity here. We put it in there because it is just the word you just said, Grant. It is, in fact, taking a very task-oriented environment and doing some translation of that culture into recognizing that it's not just Robin's staff that's responsible for internal controls, that it doesn't matter where you're working in the organization. That would shock a lot. If we went to a traditional state department that doesn't even have, think if all the departments in the state of California ever had external audits and this discussion going on, Pedro. Can you imagine what a difference the state of California would be? I mean, this is a level of... Yeah, right. But this is a level of rigor that should go on. And when it confronts that business culture, it shows you the changes you have to introduce, and that's what we're going through here. And it's appropriate. But that's my view. It's part of the answer in addition to doing the tasks of internal control development. Now, I guess I'd turn to you guys, Brenda.
Want to answer?
I'd be
Mr.
happy
Boykin?
to try to address that question as well. I think, Grant, you talked about, is there a cultural issue? I think when Crow first became the independent auditor, we perhaps perceived that there was a cultural issue, and I think the training and education is a conduit to help solve that across the organization. You start with the tone of the top, executive management. Member Reyes spoke to the education that's expected over the next year to the different levels of the organization. I think the point that we wanted to make here is, number one, it's not a point in time that we expect the organization to come to us as external auditors and say, is this what you want? The purpose of internal controls is not to satisfy the external auditor. It is for the organization, and that's the point that we wanted to make. And internal controls constantly evolve. They're very fluid. And so there needs to be a monitoring process in place that as the control environment changes, the documentation regarding that control environment also needs to change, and it also needs to be monitored. So part of the purpose of this particular comment is to address that item and emphasize the importance of that as the system looks to improve its internal control structure. Does that help from our
Yeah, it does.
perspective?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Reyes?
I think I just want to be clear that, when I talk about the corrective action and what are we doing, I whole support training. I mean, I think it's great, and I think it's something that should be going on. But I think I want to be clear that it's not for the benefit of this board member, and it's not for the benefit of this committee, as far as I'm concerned. It's for the integrity of the fund. And that's my fiduciary responsibility, for the integrity of the fund. So I don't, it's not that I want to ding you. I want to ding Chris or his people or, oh, I got you. It's not that. It's what is it that we need to do as an organization? And Jack, you're absolutely right. It'd be great if every state agency, went through this. But, pardon?
They would wither if the other state departments had audited this.
But the other state agencies don't deal with a fund of this magnitude. And then don't have.
Well, even some that deal with funds of $50 million, I'm just saying that.
$50 billion, and we're trying to service 800,000 members. And to me, that's serious numbers of people who depend on the integrity of this fund.
I agree.
So that is my motivating factor as to why I want to make sure that this works. That's all.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No,
I want to emphasize that. I mean, I think we're hearing kind of two messages here, and I think they're both messages, which is there are material weaknesses, and material weaknesses are significant, and yet there's been a lot of progress made, and there's a serious attitude that's being taken to address those problems. And the letter doesn't look at a point in time. It talks about the whole year, so it could be talking about something that was in place July of 2011, and here we are in November of 2012. So there's only a desire by everybody here to fix the problem, not to assign blame, not to raise alarms, to recognize that everybody is unified in wanting to fix the problem and doing a good job in that direction.
I just want to take responsibility for the use of a word here that might be causing part of the challenge in this discussion. And, I did some work in responding to the comments, and I used the word training, when really it's about educating people. And education doesn't happen overnight. You have to practice and get feedback about ways you can improve and practice again. And because of that, it's not just doing training, it's assimilating concepts in work. And that's not going to change tomorrow. So I apologize in terms of the choice of language has probably, no, I just want to, right. Right. But I want to make it.
I'd like to ask some questions before we get to an action plan, because I think as I look at this, CARM is a very important part of the solution, but what is being pointed out is what Mr. Smith described as a business unit-oriented perspective within the organization. I think last year's conversation, it was silos, but Dr. Yetman said where he comes from, silos are actually good. So we've moved on to a different terminology, business-oriented, business unit-oriented. So that's one issue beyond CARM. And the other issue beyond CARM is this question of it's not just a check the box kind of thing. And Jack said, you know, maybe we need to get our reporting to the board to go beyond just the system implementation, which has been strong and consistent and everything like that. And so I think if we can all, is that reasonable to say that we've got these two other sort of concerns? And I'd like Dr. Yetman to comment as well in terms of sort of what the scope of what needs to be addressed organizationally, and then see how we get reports back on that. I mean, last year's meeting, the decision was to have reports to the committee about the progress on addressing the material weaknesses, and that came to this committee twice since last year. So about every other meeting, which is what Dr. Yetman seems to suggest today might be appropriate. There was also talk about quarterly financial statements, actually at last year's meeting. I know because I watched the video yesterday, since I wasn't here last year. And we haven't gotten those, but we've had a discussion here about them where Robin says they're really important, they've been useful, and there's been a question perhaps as to whether they've actually also helped ensure the improvement of the internal controls, which Brenda seems to suggest they've had that added benefit, which I think is really important, because I think one of the issues that we've got to worry about at this committee is recognizing that there's tremendous commitment and progress being made. While there's a material weakness, that means that if something still could go wrong and have a material impact on the accuracy of the financial statement. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So what we want to do is we need to both know as a committee that progress is being made to fix these things and to monitor that progress, and to know that there's something in place without it being overly burdensome, and quarterly financials might be overly burdensome, and Jack has pointed out the fact that the staff has other things to do besides just, you know, monitor the progress on this. But is there a way that we can do something to get comfortable? Is there a role that audit services can play in monitoring that along the way, so we don't rely just on the annual letter that comes from Crow? So with that, I'd like Dr. Yetman, if you could comment about that, and then also Brenda, Kevin, anybody at Crow with any comments, because I think that's the kind of direction I think we're trying to head in is so.
Okay. So if I may maybe provide a perspective, some perspective in my mind. So let me take you back many, many years ago when, before we even did these opinions on internal controls, we would just beat up the balance sheet and provide an opinion on the balance sheet, an unqualified opinion or qualified, and some explanatory paragraphs. And then we as a profession, along with other agencies, COSO and some others, decided that, you know, we need to start paying attention to the internal control system and start looking at that, because it plays an integral role in the financial reporting process and in the integrity of a business overall. And so we started doing audits, a second audit, and then you see before you the result of that, a second report, not a second audit, that's the wrong way to phrase it, but an opinion over internal controls and identifying internal control weaknesses, significant deficiencies. And I think that's a good thing. We've moved in the right direction, I believe, as a profession. But we also have to keep in mind that, and put some perspective on these and the role that they play. And the role that they're supposed to play in the larger context is exactly what we're seeing today. This is giving me great joy. The auditor is supposed to dispassionately identify these issues, bring their expertise to this, and dispassionately evaluate whether it rises to the level of material weakness or not. And I'll tell you, I've observed these guys over the last couple of years. These are auditors. They love beating a balance sheet up. And a lot of detailed tested transactions and balances, fairly conservative approach to the audit, fairly conservative approach to rating what's a material weakness, what's a significant deficiency. A different audit firm may not have pulled the trigger quite as much. This varies. There's no hard and fast rule. And you've got a conservative firm here. But for my money, if you're going to pick a direction, I like this direction. But it's important to frame that properly. So these internal control disclosures are made by the auditors dispassionately, and your responsibility is to read them, digest them, and then ask management about them. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do, what they were designed to do. There are things that are uncovered by expertise of the auditors. They're brought to the board. The board raises concerns with management over this, and then then you try to fix these things. So who's in the best position to know the right way to address an internal control weakness? In my opinion, it's management. Management is in the best position to know how to address it, and the CEO has expressed, and I agree with him, it's like turning the Titanic. Sometimes when you do things fast, you get it done wrong. It's far better to invest and make the right choices, and who better is in a position than a CEO who you trust to make the right decisions on this? And so I would go that way. I would ask management what they feel the best reports are to bring to you, the right time frame to bring to you. One thing with bringing them too often, that's why I shied away from every quarter. Sometimes when you bring reports every quarter, it does more damage than it does help, because then people are just in a hurry to try to find some results to update you and make some changes, and some of these changes will be slow. The process of educating the workforce in the psychology of internal control is an embedded process that takes time, and it's not going to show results from 3 months to 3 months. And so I worry about a continuous update of a quarterly report. And so how often should it be? I would let management make that recommendation to you, and you determine whether or not that's reasonable. And I can help you with that assessment, but I'd let them come back to you with what they think the right process is. So I'm happy that this is working. The wheels are working the right way. The auditors did their job and found them. You're prickly about it. I'd love to see that. You've read them. You're paying attention, and management is aware of these. And I think it's in my opinion the right is now let them go with it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can comment as well. I'd like to point the committee to ARM 88, if you will, and looking at Ms. Madsen's response to that particular comment. I think perhaps what may be effective, if you look at a system of internal controls, you need to look at the design of the control, the implementation of the control, and if it's operating effectively. And what she cites in her second paragraph is the work that financial services did to look at the 52 controls they identified and then evaluate if they were fully or partially satisfied. So that may be a little bit more granular than you need, but it certainly is a reporting mechanism to provide back to the committee as to the progress that the organization is making with respect to their internal control structure. I think, Mr. Chair, you mentioned the role of audit services. I think that is also a consideration in terms of what role can they play in monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of those controls. So I just wanted to comment in that fashion.
Any other questions or comments? I guess I like Dr. Yetman's recommendation, which is to rely on management. This is obviously being driven by management, and I think this committee recognizes, Jack, the commitment from the top here, and we appreciate that, and that's well recognized and relied upon by this committee. So I think we can look to you. I mean, last year there were some specifics about what should be coming to this committee. I would be interested in seeing whether there's a role that audit services can play, in particular, not only in terms of making sure that we're improving, but also that we're not running into a problem while we're fixing the system. So I think if we can get a report back from you and from Robin and from Marianne and about what we what to bring to this committee so that we can monitor it. Is that satisfactory? Anybody have any other questions?
I do that, and I like Brenda's suggestion. We actually around the testing of the controls that we mentioned in that paragraph. Maybe we'll look at broadening that to the other branches of the organization then, and getting a more granular measurement of what's going on all across the whole organization. So we'll talk that through.
And I like. I'm sorry, Robin, did you?
Go ahead.
No, and Jack, I think what you said earlier about we don't want to just be focusing on the technological, the CARM implementation, but there's more to it than that. So I think whatever report is going to come back to this committee needs to address that too. So.
And again, I guess my emphasis would be on the fact that this is a process. So we have had part of our technology changed over the course of the last 6 months. We're starting to get better information on inbound contributions from employers. And what I'll let you know is that information is very rich, and it really begs the question, okay, so now what do we do to analyze this and try and detect the errors? And I can tell you that just the availability of information creates the opportunity to improve the control environment, and it's going to take us some time. So I'm getting reports now on a weekly basis about contribution volumes coming in. So that's a result of the technology improvements that we've made with penalties and interest and connecting those together. What I have now are more questions. So it provides the opportunity for us to learn how to ask more questions based on the fact that information is universally available. So again, I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the fact that this is in fact a very long life process, not only to implement the technology, but to use the information that is then available to understand where the risks are. And it's just going to feed upon itself.
I think that's very important to recognize. I appreciate that. And I think we haven't really actually talked that much about the third material weakness, which does have to do with the member data, and it's in a sense it's a somewhat different issue because it's making sure we're getting the right information from the school districts. And I know in other ways we've been addressing that within the organization, and I think appreciate that was embedded in the two material weaknesses last year. It's being called out this year, in part because we've been making some good progress on the other two, and in part because we do have to make sure about the integrity of the data. If the data that comes in isn't accurate, nothing, everything flows from that. So appreciate that, and when we get your suggestions, Jack, for reporting back, obviously that's the other piece that we would want to be monitoring. I think this has been extremely helpful. I think the efforts by Crow and the comments by Crow and the insights and Dr. Yetman's assistance, and of course the staff and Jack and everybody else addressing this and taking it very seriously. I don't think the questions that have come from this committee should be taken as anything other than the seriousness with which we all appreciate the commitment to these issues, and recognizing that a tremendous amount of progress has been made, and that we're positioned to make a lot more progress. So that's really wonderful to see. So I think with that we have 3 reports to accept.
Move approval or accept the report, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair,
I
I apologize to
I'm
interrupt
sorry.
you. There's one report that we have not
Oh,
covered. If
there
it's
is.
okay
I'm
that
sorry. I'm jumping the gun.
we spend the time
Yeah.
to present that
Yeah,
if all
sorry.
the questions have
Yeah.
been asked.
Okay.
Is that, okay.
And,
Keep my mouth shut.
yeah.
I think Dr. Yetman would like to speak up here.
Just real quick, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give some thoughts as to why that third material weakness. Mr. Smith referred to it was kind of pulled out, but there have been some exogenous shocks to the system that caused that to be pulled out. It initially, so you start with 2 one year and you go to 3 the next year, and it seems like, well, maybe that's movement the wrong way. That's not really what happened. That's not really why that third one got pulled out. There's something quite significant, and it's the 2 new GASBs that come out. At least in my opinion, this is what's really driving this. And this is why I support this as a material weakness, and I'm glad they pulled it out this way. Look, the way that we account for liabilities in financial statements and where they show up, the unfunded nature, if there is an unfunded nature of the liability, is going through a lot of upheaval recently. Long ago, you had to dig around to find that thing. Then pretty soon we started putting it in the financial statements and we started moving it up a little closer to the front. Well, now all of a sudden it's going to start getting a whole lot closer to the front, and someone's going to have to start showing those liabilities. Furthermore, we're using a blended rate to discount those liabilities, which can act to make them even larger. So the fact that there will be obviously a large unfunded liability, and the question is, well, where's that going to show up? Well, in the responsible parties, possibly school districts, possibly the state, probably a part of it, 10%, 20, with some percentage. These are going to be big numbers on units' financial statements, school districts' financial statements, that will have an economic effect on the school districts. For example, if they need to go outside for funding to bridge a loan to bridge a period of time, that liability on the balance sheet could produce negative equity, and it'll make it more difficult for school districts to get loans. There's real economic impact here. There's real economic impact to the GASB statement. And what's the input to those liabilities? Where's the data come from used to calculate those liabilities? A lot of it is coming from member data. And so that's why it was elevated. In my opinion, one reason it should have been elevated to a material weakness was to say, hey, here's liabilities that are going to start showing up on a lot of financial statements of entities across the state, perhaps the state as well. It might affect real economic activities, and the information that's going in to calculate that liability is now more important than it used to be. It's always been important, but now it has a different use that heightens its importance. And so I think it's important to know why this popped up. Is it that, gee, everything was fine last year and now all of a sudden it's terrible? That's not it at all. It's just that an exogenous shock's been placed on us all, a new use of the data. And that, in part, precipitated, in my opinion, the attention that it got from auditors. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yetman.
Go ahead.
Slide. Okay, so the third report that we still have yet to present can be found on ARM 99. It is our required communications to those charged with governance. So from an audit perspective, this letter covers matters relevant to the financial statement audit that, in our professional judgment, are significant and relevant to your responsibilities as those charged with governance. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of those. Mr. Smith previously spoke to our responsibility under generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. On ARM 99, we have captured on this page, or I'm sorry, ARM 100, we've captured on this page critical accounting policies and estimates. These policies and estimates tie into the two emphasis paragraphs as well as the matters that Ms. Allen and Mr. Moore spoke to relative to the funded status of the retirement plan and the Medicare premium payment program, as well as the fair value of the hard-to-value investments, private equity, and real estate. On ARM 101, the significant accounting policies, there were really no new accounting policies in the current year, and Mr. Smith, as soon as I get done, is going to cover a couple of items relative to the new GASBs that Dr. Yetman just spoke to. On ARM 102, again, we emphasize the fair value estimates of the investment securities, primarily in the areas of private equity and real estate. We also talk about the actuarial accrued liabilities in our evaluation of the assumptions and estimates that are used to determine those liabilities. On ARM 103, where we talk about auditors' judgments about qualitative aspects of significant accounting practices, again, we evaluate management's decisions relative to their policies. We found them to be conservative and neutral, not a lot of bias, and so therefore we're comfortable in those areas. Several of us spoke to there were no corrected or uncorrected misstatements to report to you in the current year. Also on ARM 103, we communicate to you that we are independent of the system to perform the services that we've performed. And then you'll find on ARM 104 and 105 just speaks to other communications and items that we've reviewed that if there was anything significant we would bring to your attention. So that concludes the third report that we wanted to cover. Any questions before you make your motion?
we still have one more piece of the presentation, is that right on that?
Small.
Okay, let's. why don't we
Excuse
do
me,
that
very small, and
before we
Dr.
get
Yetman did a great job of explaining.
Steal it?
You stole my thunder once again. You took it last year with the silo in Iowa, but oh well. Again, as Dr. Yetman pointed out, with the issuance of GASB 67 and 68, how employers, as well as the actual plan, account for their financial statements has dramatically changed. My 20 years of serving state and local governments, I think I could only point out GASB 34 as possibly being that big of a fundamental change within GAAP. As it relates to the pension plan's financial statements itself, there's relatively limited impacts to the financial statements. There will be a couple nuances that your management's very aware of. They are remaining on top of implementation efforts, developing plans. I'm pleased with the approach they're taking. Where the really significant impact is actually on your contributing members or your school districts in the state. They have some fundamental wholesale changes that are going to have to be made, and as Dr. Yetman said, the $64 billion liability is now going to end up on somebody's financial statements. So with that being said, even though I said the financial statements for your system are going to be relatively simplistic, are the changes, that information that the member districts are going to be coming to, the place that they've got to come to is your management. So there will be a significant amount of time and effort required by your staff to respond to those entities. The other thing is that the vast majority of those entities receive audited financial statements. They're going to have an auditor saying, well, how good is this number? So they're going to be knocking on your door or trying to figure out exactly how they get comfortable with that information. So it's a wholesale fundamental change. It's going to be vast, or it's going to be significant numbers. And again, Dr. Yetman's exactly right. That's the primary reason for why we broke 3 out, tried to show the importance of that and the impact of 68.
Well, there's a silver lining to that. They may have a greater appreciation for the quality of their input from that as well.
That is exactly.
I mean, I'm hoping that we have a circular discussion.
And there is, and I would agree with management there. With increased scrutiny on the number, one would hope both from the school district, the school district's auditors, there will be a greater appreciation for the accuracy of that data. So in a lot of respects, I think it's good for the clarity and the overall fiduciary aspects of the fund.
Any questions about that? Anything more from our auditors or from staff or from our consultant before we do take action? Okay, so I think we had a motion from Mr. Reyes. I don't know that we had a second. Now we have a second. So all in favor? Aye. Looks opposed? Looks like it passes. Thank you very, very much. Very useful. And
apologies for the interruption.
No excuses can we make for Pedro. So, thank you very much. I think we'll move on then to the next item on our agenda, which is the approval of the minutes.
Second, with one correction on top of page 111. Since we're not in the South, I asked that you correct that word.
So with that change, all in favor? Yeah? Did we get that change? Yeah. Okay, good. So you do read this carefully. Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes. Audit Director's update. Do we have anything, Mary Ann?
I will be very brief. I just wanted to thank the committee and to report the progress of filling some of our vacancies, and would like to introduce 2 of our new supervisors in employer audits. I'll let them stand. Amel Katan and Kurt Marston come with extensive audit backgrounds, and I am very pleased to have them joining us in audit services, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce them to the committee.
Thank you.
And to let you know that we are proceeding with filling of our other vacancies, and hopefully within the next 30 days, I will almost have a full team. So that's my report.
Okay. Review of information requests. Did we have any?
So I heard a request for Jack, Robin, and Marianne to bring some ideas about what should be reported back to the committee on implementing
Yes.
the report, and then maybe some ideas for broadening the technological updates that are given on Business Renew to encompass more a broader perspective on internal controls.
So I agree. We need to come back to you with our recommended reporting approach to keep you apprised of progress against these material weaknesses and significant deficiency. And that might include both things to the RM committee as well as the expansion of the Business Renew presentation within the board. But we will come back to you at the next meeting with the structure of that reporting.
Okay. Is that satisfactory then? Okay. Right,
So
great.
will that be maybe in, I see item 3, we have progress on external financial auditors reports on internal control corrective action, so maybe in that item.
That was the placeholder
Okay.
for it,
For the next,
for the February meeting.
okay. Okay. So that's the next topic, which is the draft agenda for the next committee meeting. Any comments or questions on that? It's just an informational item. Opportunities for statements from the public. Anybody from the public want to speak? Seeing none, I think we're done. So thank you very much, and we're adjourned.